We live in a world where Alabama, Tennessee, Missouri, Michigan, and USC all lost on the same day. Crazy, right? Well, that's college football. October 5th's upsets drastically changed the rankings in the AP Top 25 poll. So how much did each team get punished? Alabama and Tennessee are no longer in the top 5. Missouri and Michigan are clinging to the bottom of the ranks, and USC didn't even make the cut. Only 12 undefeated teams remain, and another enticing slate of matchups is right up ahead. Welcome back to Penn State Sports Night. I'm Amanda Vogt, joined with Cailey, Thalman, and Jenna, Wissman, here to try to make sense of all of the chaos. Now, Cailey, out of these teams that lost last weekend, which team that lost shocked you the most?
Well, a weekend like this is why you love college football, right? Because they always keep it interesting, no matter who the team is. And this weekend just showed that to the fullest extent. I kept trying to go to bed, and I couldn't because there was another game on upset alert. And that brings me to the Alabama-Vanderbilt upset. My gosh, first of all, I want to give credit to Diego Pavia, the Vanderbilt quarterback, who had an exceptional performance in that game. He had 80% of passes completed. He threw for 252 yards, 2 touchdowns, and rushed for 56 yards on top of that. So he had an exceptional performance. But I think there were 3 main reasons why that upset occurred. First, I want to talk about the fact that Vanderbilt stopped Jaden Milroe on the ground. He couldn't do anything on the ground. He only rushed for 10 yards, which he's known as one of the best dual threat quarterbacks in college football. So that was great on their part. The second thing is time of possession. Vanderbilt had the ball for 42 minutes in this game, meaning Alabama only had 18 minutes of time to work with. So they really couldn't get anything done. Now, Alabama's really good on the explosive plays front. So that's why they were able to keep it as close as they ended up keeping it. But Alabama never led. Vanderbilt had the lead the entire time because they kept it consistent with short gains, and that's how they got down the field. And finally, there was just so much momentum from Vanderbilt's front all around. It was almost like they were feeding off themselves because the environment at Vanderbilt just is not really anything to write home about. The crowd was more full of Alabama fans, which is typically the case in that stadium, but they were feeding off of each other, and they just kept to their game plan. Like I said, those short gains, and that's how they ended up winning that game.
Especially after how Bama and that Georgia game happened the week prior, this game was not one that I thought Bama would drop. But Jenna, which one stood out to you?
So the game that stood out to me had to be Arkansas taking down number 4 ranked Tennessee. This was a big deal, I think, because Arkansas was at home. So the fans were there. They brought the energy. They even got to rush the field at the end, which was really exciting. But Arkansas hasn't beat a top 5 team since 2007. So that's a huge deal. And they were able to come back from a first half deficit. The score was 14-3. And in the second half, they were able to dominate. Their backup quarterback even scored their game-winning points. So that's a huge deal. Tennessee just didn't look confident. I think they really lacked that in the game, and they have some work to do if they want to get back to where they were before that.
Yeah, now the top 5 looks a little bit different with some teams climbing up there. That one that might not have had the most convincing wins. Jenna, I'm going to start with you. What are your takes on these teams that currently have those first 5 positions?
So I'm a little iffy on Texas. I'm kind of taking this question in a different direction. Yeah. They're at number 1 right now, but I think Ohio State should be ahead of them just because of the matchups that they've had over Texas. They've played and they beat Michigan State and Iowa. And Iowa was a huge win for them because they came back in the second half, which was a big deal. And I just think when you look at the teams they've played and the team they have, I think it's a lot better than this Texas team and what Texas has played against. So Texas, they've only beat Mississippi State and Michigan. And Michigan's not a great team this year. So I don't think they should have that number 1 spot. I think Ohio State should get it. And we're going to see Ohio State really get tested this weekend on Saturday when they play Oregon. Huge matchup coming. So I think Ohio State might take that number 1 spot.
Now, Jenna, I have a question for you kind of regarding that number 1 spot. There's been so much talk about the strength of the SEC. Do you think the SEC champion will end up with that number 1 spot heading into the playoffs?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think so, yes. I think they will end up with that number 1 spot just because how strong the SEC is.
Now I want to take it over to the Big Ten on this question and talk about Penn State and Oregon, because like I kind of just alluded to, the SEC is such a strong conference that all of those games could be regarded as tough, which, I mean, the Alabama and Vanderbilt game proves that. But these two Big Ten teams really have not been tested. You could argue on Oregon's front, Boise State, now a 17th ranked team, would be a somewhat of a test. They won that game by 3 points, the last second field goal. And Penn State, maybe you could make the case for that Illinois game, which they were very dominant against. But neither of those two teams are really massive opponents. They have yet to play their biggest opponents. So I think it's tough to make an argument that either of those two teams deserve that 3 or 4 spot over a team like Georgia, who lost to Alabama, or even down the line, some of those other SEC teams, Tennessee. Even though Georgia and Tennessee have lost recently, Georgia's one loss was to previously the number 1 team in the country. So I think I'm really unconvinced by Penn State. They're really slow to start every game they've played in, especially the game they just played against UCLA. They couldn't get that first touchdown until I believe it was 7 minutes to go in the second quarter. And Oregon, again, I'm really unconvinced by their secondary and also Dylan Gabriel. His completion percentage is very, very good this season, but he cannot play those deep balls consistently, and that's going to be necessary if you want to beat a team like Ohio State.
And it's hard to go off this when you've only had a couple games. Penn State's only played 2 conference opponents, so it's going to be tough moving forward, as all of these teams are going to have the rest of the nation gunning for them, especially after what we saw the shakeup look like after last week. But I also agree that I do not think Penn State should be at number 4, and it gives them a little bit more leeway with 12 spots. But when you see Michigan drop 14 and just basically almost out of the ranks after what happened to them this week, it can be tough. But these teams are going to have some pretty exciting matchups. Let's break some of those down. Cailey, I'm starting with you. You've been eyeing this one for a while. Which one are you most excited for?
Oh, Jenna, you mentioned it earlier. Oregon and Ohio State. That's the first Big Ten matchup that everyone's had marked on their calendars. And speaking of marked on their calendars, this weekend in college football, if you're a college football fan, you've had this weekend marked on your calendar since the seasons came out. Because like I said in the last question, these are two teams that have not really truly been tested yet, and that's going to happen at Autzen Stadium in Oregon this weekend. College game day's going, so there's a lot of hype around this game, and I think these two teams match up really, really well. Both a little bit inconsistent in the quarterback position. This game is going to come down to the line of scrimmage and who wins that line of scrimmage battle, especially because of the strength of Oregon's O-line.
Yeah, I'm really excited to watch this game on Saturday, but I'm also really excited to see how Penn State's going to do on the road. They're headed to the West Coast. They've played their last 4 games at home, so they're not going to be in Beaver Stadium. The vibes are going to be different, the energy and the weather. So you got to take all that into account. They're making that trip over to the West Coast. I think they need to not start out slow. You mentioned it. I don't think they are going to do well if they do start out slow, because USC, they're not a bad team. I know they just got upset by Minnesota, but I think they're a good team. And I think Penn State needs to be really strong with their run game with Nick Singleton coming back. Amanda, you were at Media Day today. Tell us, what's the update on Nick Singleton?
Yeah, so James Franklin reiterated that on Saturday he expected Nick Singleton to go up until warm-ups, where Coach Sider came up to him and said, yep, nope, he's not going to be able to go in. But as long as he doesn't face any setbacks this week, expected to see him at practice. You'll see that hopefully on Monday when media gets a window to see how he's looking, what his progress is like. But he expects to play. He spoke with Franklin, said he is confident to go. But Penn State needs to rely that they can do well in the second half, but bring that energy into quarters 1 and the first half of quarter 2. Their defense has looked better since conference play has started, which is a good sign considering it's a little bit shaky at the start with some of those non-conference opponents. Well, if we've learned one thing this week, it's college football is simply unpredictable no matter how hard we try. No team is safe so far, and those top 12 teams, watch out. The entire nation wants a crack at the extended college football playoff. For Cailey, Thalman, and Jenna Wissman, I'm Amanda Vogt. Thank you for tuning into this week's episode of Penn State Sports Night, College Football Edition.
Hey everybody, thank you for tuning into this edition of Penn State Sports Night. We hope you liked that segment.
And we're sure there's other Penn State Sports Night segments that you are going to love as well. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more content.
And check us out on social media for updates and behind the scenes clips and pics. Follow us on Twitter at PSSN TV and on Instagram at PSU Sports Night to keep up with all the action.
For all of us here at the Belisari Media Center, we are
Penn State Sports Night.